A fake HOA president slapped me in front of the entire neighborhood, so I didn't slap him back. I audited him instead, the slap that started a doubler. He didn't just insult me, he slapped me. Right there at the gated entrance of the neighborhood. It was a quiet Saturday morning. The kind where the sun feels calm and the streets are almost peaceful. I was visiting a friend who had just moved into this upscale community. Fresh paint on the houses, perfectly trimmed lawns, expensive cars parked neatly in driveways. The type of place where everything looks controlled. As I pulled up to the gate, I slowed down and rolled down my window, expecting a simple check-in. Instead, a man in a bright polo shirt with an oversized HOA president badge stepped directly in front of my car like he owned the road. He didn't walk up politely. He positioned himself like a guard at a fortress. He looked me up and down before I even said a word. "Who are you?" he demanded. Not "good morning," not "how can I help you?" Just suspicion. I calmly explained that I was there to visit a friend and gave him the house number. I even showed him the text message invitation on my phone. He didn't even glance at it properly. "I need your ID," he said sharply. I handed it to him. He studied it like he was a federal agent. Then he shook his head. "You don't look like you belong here." That sentence hung in the air. I asked what that was supposed to mean. He ignored the question and accused me of trying to slip past security. His voice was loud enough that a couple walking their dog stopped to stare. A car lined up behind me. I stayed calm. I told him he could call the homeowner to confirm. I even offered to wait, but he wasn't interested in solutions. He was interested in control. Then he leaned into my open window. I could smell coffee on his breath. His face tightened with frustration, like I had personally offended him by existing. "People like you don't belong here," he repeated, before I could respond. His hand came across my face. It wasn't a knockout punch. It wasn't violent enough to leave bruises, but it was deliberate. A slap meant to humiliate. For a second, everything went silent. My cheek burned. Not from pain, from disbelief. Neighbors were watching. Cameras were mounted above the gate. The car behind me had a clear view, and he stepped back, adjusted his fake badge, and walked away like he had just enforced the law of the land, like he had power, like he was untouchable. But here's what he didn't know. Wasn't the HOA president. He wasn't even on the board. He had no legal authority, no official title, no power beyond the confidence of someone who had never been challenged. He was just a self-appointed gatekeeper who loved the feeling of control, someone who mistook intimidation for leadership. That slap wasn't about security. It was about ego. And in that moment, standing at that gate with cameras recording and witnesses staring, he thought he had won. He thought he had embarrassed me. What he didn't realize was simple. When you humiliate the wrong person in public, you don't end the story. You start it. And that slap, that was the biggest mistake of his life. The truth behind the badgie didn't yell. I didn't fight back. I did something much better. I took a breath, touched my still burning cheek, and drove away from the gate. Not because I was afraid, but because I understood something important. Emotional reactions feel powerful in the moment. Strategic reactions change outcomes. The first call I made was to my friend, the actual homeowner. He was shocked, completely blindsided. According to him, the HOA president was an older woman who rarely even attended meetings. The man at the gate? He wasn't supposed to be there at all. That raised a serious question. If he wasn't the president, why was he acting like one? Then I made the second call. See, I work in financial compliance. My job revolves around numbers, audits, and making sure organizations follow the law. Over the years, I've built strong professional relationships. One of my closest friends happens to be a senior IRS audit specialist. Now, let me be clear. I'm not someone who throws around government names to scare people. I don't believe in abusing systems for personal revenge. But when someone pretends to hold authority, collects security fees, pressures residents for cash payments, and uses intimidation to silence questions, that's no longer neighborhood drama. That's financial misconduct. That's a legal issue. Within 24 hours, we started looking into public records. HOA filings are not secret. Community associations are required to maintain transparent accounting. Budgets, tax filings, fee structures, they all leave paper trails. And what we found was interesting. The so-called security fund he had been collecting from residents, not officially registered in the HOA's financial statements. The community improvement fees, he insisted, were mandatory. No clear accounting trail. Even more shocking, several residents admitted they had paid cash for gate access stickers. No receipts. No documentation. Just verbal instructions and pressure to comply or risk losing privileges. That's when the pattern became clear. He wasn't protecting the neighborhood. He was exploiting it. The more we asked questions, the more stories surfaced. Elderly homeowners who felt intimidated into paying extra late penalties. New residents who were told their move-in approval required unofficial processing fees. Renters who were threatened with access restrictions if they didn't comply. And the real HOA board? They had no idea. When my friend finally reached the legitimate board members, they were stunned. They assumed he was a volunteer helping with gate coordination. They never authorized him to collect funds. They never approved cash handling. They never reviewed any reports because none were submitted. He had inserted himself into a position of influence. And no one had challenged him. Until now. Once financial discrepancies start surfacing, they don't stay small. Questions lead to documentation requests. Documentation requests lead to deeper reviews. And when numbers don't match explanations, things escalate quickly. Suddenly, that oversized badge didn't look impressive anymore. It looked suspicious. He thought standing at a gate gave him power. He thought confidence and loud authority would keep people quiet. But authority without accountability is fragile. And now, his carefully built illusion was beginning to crack, because his little side operation wasn't facing gossip. It wasn't facing a complaint. It was facing something much scarier. An audit. When authority gets AUD, the investigation moved fast. Faster than he ever expected. Once the right questions were asked, things that had been ignored for months suddenly demanded answers. Residents were interviewed one by one. Some were nervous. Some were angry. Many were relieved someone was finally looking into it. Stories started lining up. Cash payments with no receipts. Mandatory. Fees that didn't appear on official HOA statements. Threats about losing gate access if payments weren't made on time. Then came the paperwork. Financial records were formally requested. Bank deposits were compared to reported income. HOA filings were reviewed line by line. What was documented didn't match what residents described paying. That gap? That's where problems lived. At the same time, the gate camera footage was pulled, and there it was. As they him standing in front of my car. Him leaning into my window. Him raising his hand. The slap wasn't a rumor anymore. It was evidence. Suddenly, the man who used to strut around the gate like a sheriff in a small town stopped showing up. No more oversized badge. No more loud voice. No more intimidation tactics. He disappeared. Within weeks, official letters were sent out to homeowners. The language was careful, but serious. Discrepancies had been found in the association's financial activity. An internal review was underway. Residents were encouraged to come forward with any undocumented payments. Emergency board meetings were called. This time, they were packed. The real HOA president, the one actually elected and registered with the state, stood in front of the community and made something very clear. The so-called gate enforcer had never been authorized to collect money. He had never been appointed to represent the board. He had no legal authority whatsoever. Murmurs spread through the room. People felt betrayed. Some felt embarrassed for trusting him. And then came the consequences. First, financial recovery efforts began. Funds that had been improperly collected were traced. Restitution demands were issued. Residents who had paid cash were asked to provide statements. Then came the tax implications. Unreported income has a way of attracting attention. When money is collected outside official channels and not declared properly, penalties follow: fines, interest, legal notices, and finally, there was the personal consequence: a formal complaint for assault. Because while financial misconduct is serious, physical aggression caught on camera is undeniable. Turns out, pretending to have power is risky, especially when the person you try to humiliate understands systems, documentation, and accountability better than you do. He thought the badge made him untouchable. He thought the gate made him important. He thought one slap would silence me. Instead, that single moment triggered reviews, investigations, meetings, and consequences that reached far beyond a neighborhood entrance. The slap that was meant to embarrass me? It exposed him. And once exposure happens, authority built on intimidation collapses fast. The lesson he learned too late a few months later. The gate looked completely different. Not physically. The walls were the same. The keypad was the same. The guard booth still stood in the same spot. But the energy had changed. No fake badges. No self-appointed enforcers. No loud voices trying to intimidate visitors. Instead, there was a professional security company hired directly by the real HOA board. Uniformed guards. Logged entries. Clear procedures. If you were a guest, they called the homeowner and confirmed. Simple, respectful, efficient. Residents began to relax. For the first time in a long while, board meetings weren't tense. Financial reports were printed, explained, and distributed transparently. Every dollar collected had a record. Every expense had documentation. Questions were answered instead of dismissed. The culture of fear slowly disappeared. People who once avoided speaking up started participating again. Neighbors who felt pressured into paying extra fees were refunded. Elderly residents who had been intimidated were personally apologized to by the board. Order was restored, but this time it was built on structure, not ego. As for him, last I heard, he was dealing with repayment agreements, tax penalties, and legal consequences that cost far more than his little authority stunt ever earned him. Money that once came in easily now had to be paid back with interest. Reputation that once looked strong was permanently damaged. And the worst part for someone like him? He wasn't feared anymore. He was exposed. Here's what I learned through all of this. Real power doesn't need to shout. Real authority doesn't need to slap. And real leaders don't hide behind fake titles or oversized badges. Authority that depends on intimidation is fragile. It only survives as long as people stay silent. The moment someone calmly challenges it with facts, documentation, and patience, it begins to crumble. He thought he could control people by making them uncomfortable, by making them feel small, by standing at a gate and deciding who belonged. But the moment he crossed the line from arrogance to assault, he lost everything. Not because I fought him. Not because I insulted him back, but because I refused to play his game. There's something powerful about staying calm when someone expects you to explode. about choosing strategy over ego, about letting systems handle what emotions can't dot. So if you ever face someone who abuses fake authority, whether it's in a neighborhood, a workplace, or anywhere else, remember this. Stay calm, document everything, know your rights. And most importantly, don't let intimidation rush you into reacting in a way that weakens your position. Because sometimes the strongest response isn't a slap back, it isn't shouting louder, that it isn't proving who's tougher, accountability, and accountability always lasts longer than fear. If this story shocked you, imagine what's coming next. Drop a comment below. What would you have done at that gate? Smash that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss a story where karma works over time.